Tonight is 30 days before Yud Tes Kislev, right? Today was Yud Tes Cheshvan. The Gemara says in Psachim, Shleishim Yoim Lefnei Achag, 30 days before the holiday, you prepare yourself for the holiday. The Lubavitchers and many others, and in fact Rabbi Soloveitchik, as we'll discuss a little later, celebrated the Yud Tes Kislev, the day when the Baal Tanya, the founder of the Chabad movement, was released from jail because of various accusations against him, which we're not going to dwell on tonight, but I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein told over an interesting story when he eulogized the Rabbi Rebbe in 1994. Rabbi Soloveitchik passed away in 1993. Rabbi Rebbe passed away in 1994. Rabbi Rebbe was born in 1902. Rabbi Soloveitchik was born in 1903. Rabbi Soloveitchik was born in Chaslavich, Russia, and Rabbi Rebbe was born in Nikolaev. So these were two giants, two holy people that were raised in a shtetl. They were really shtetl Yidalach. They came to Berlin in 1928, 26, 28, and they were exposed to the world of university and intellectualism, and then they both came to America. The Rav came to Boston, the Rebbe came to New York, and the rest is history. So Rabbi Lichtenstein, Rabbi Aaron, who was the son-in-law, one of the son-in-laws of the Rav, he said, when he eulogized the Rebbe, he said that he heard that Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik, the Rav's brother, Rosh Yeshiva of Brisk in Chicago, when he sent one of his grandsons went to a Chabad camp, a Gan Yisrael, the Gan Yisrael camps that I'm sure you have here in New Jersey as well. So he went to one of these programs and he visited his grandson. And the grandson told him that, this is back I think in 1960 or the late 50s, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe came to the Catskills to visit the camp. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, didn't generally leave Brooklyn, 770, Crown Heights, except to his father-in-law's gravesite, the Ohel in Queens, except he went 3 times to the Catskills. 56, 57, I believe, in 1960, he visited the girls' camp, Camp Amunah, the Rabbi J.J. Hecht, Rabbi Yaakov J.J. Hecht's camp for the girls, Camp Amunah, and he went to Camp Gan Yisrael for the boys. But besides those 3 times, and a few other times he went to Rabbi Menachem Mendel, a few people, he didn't leave his abode for whatever reason, and I discussed that also in the book, possible thoughts on that idea, because it does have to do with Rabbi Soloveitchik, and maybe we will get to it or not. If not, you'll read it in the book or ask me later. Anyway, so he comes there and he sees his grandson, and he says, so what did the Rebbe say when he came to visited you? Well, what did he say? So he says he spoke. He spoke and he gave a bracha, and he said, so what did he say? He said, and Mashiach should come. He remembered, the boy remembered that everything that the Rebbe said. Remember that the Rebbe put an emphasis towards the end that Mashiach should come. So Rabbi Aaron said to his grandson, we say the Yud Gimel Ikrim Animami Be'emunah Shalem. I believe with complete. What's is that the Greise Chiddush? What did Lubavitcher Rebbe leave you children with? It's part of basics. So the boy said to his Zayda, he said, we say it, and he believes it. And I begin with that not to emphasize the point of Mashiach, which is another discussion, the point about the Rav and the Rebbe. These were two people that believed in what they said. They lived with emes. And because they lived with emes, and that was their motto, truth, they got criticism. They had opponents. They had opposition. Because when you stand up for what's right, and you don't allow people to blow you to the right and the left, then you have foes and enemies. But at the end of the day, what the Rav accomplished with over 2,000 Talmidim Musmachim, graduates, many of which are rabbis in this community and other communities all over the world, and the Rebbe with his Hasidim and the Chabad houses, which everyone knows about, now, 22, 23 years later, after these two people have passed on, you see clearly the emes shebedavar, the truth. And rather than giving you a formal lecture, which I'm sure you have in the shul here, I want to fabrain with you, because Rabbi Soloveitchik said in 1968 in Boston at the Yutas Kislev event, Rabbi Cement, the rabbi there, invited him, and after he spoke for half an hour or an hour, he says, and there was a group of 8 Chabad Bochran students that came from 770, they drove down in honor of the Rav, and he said, now let's fabrain. It's Yutas Kislev. So I'm going to fabrain with you a little bit today. So you'll allow me, you'll forgive me for some formalities. We're going to fabrain a little bit, okay? When we talk about the Rav and the Rebbe's emeskite, their truthfulness, I want a few little anecdotes and stories just to highlight this and how it shaped Yiddishkeit, Judaism. In the early 50s, there was a whole issue called Giyus Bonus, the drafting of girls to the Israeli army. Giyus Bonus. This caused a big uproar in the Jewish world. Marvin Schick, I don't know if anyone knows the name, he lives in Brooklyn and he's endorsed the book. He told me the story himself. And he's a good historian, so we could rely on his words. Reb Aaron Kotler of Lakewood, Reb Mendel Zaks, the Chofetz Chaim's son-in-law, met with Rabbi Soloveitchik in Mendel Sax's apartment in the Lower East Side. I believe that's where it was. Reb Aaron was the one who called the meeting. Now, if you've read about Reb Aaron, you heard about him, he was a very fiery person, very fiery. And very opinionated. Just like the Lubavitch Rebbe was opinionated and the Rabbi Soloveitchik was opinion. Everyone has an opinion. Their opinion meant something. And he wanted Rabbi Soloveitchik to sign on a certain document. And Rabbi Soloveitchik did not, the Rav did not, he didn't give him the green light. So he decided he's going to call him to the table. He was older than, I believe he was older than the Rav, and he's going to call him to the table. And with the Chofetz Chaim's son-in-law here, they'll be able to pressure him. And they're talking and talking, and they see that he's, listening with his chokhmah. He was a wise person, a chacham, smart person, a wise person. And Reb Aaron sees that he's not getting anywhere. He's not moving him. He's not getting into. So he says like this. He says in Yiddish, and I'll translate. He says, he used to call him Boston Rav. The way Reb Aaron called Rabbi Soloveitchik was Boston Rav, the rabbi, the Rav of Boston. He said, Boston Rav. Let us forget for a moment that wir sitzen da, that we are sitting here, right? Let's forget for a moment. Let us think for a moment, as wer sitzt da, who's sitting here, nicht ihr, not you, nor I say the Reb Chaim, your grandfather, Reb Chaim Brisker, Bigodl mi Menu Reb Chaim. Und Reb Mendel Sachs sitzt nicht da, und Reb Mendel Sachs is not sitting here. Now, wer sitzt da, who's sitting here? The Chofetz Chaim. And finally says, and I'm not sitting here, nor mein Schwer, who's hier, Rabbi Yosef Zalman Meltzer. Jetzt, Boston Rov, wird euch nicht chasmenen? Will you also not sign? And when he said that, the Rav went to the chair, went to the closet, took his coat, and he walked out. You couldn't me say in Yiddish, abkaufen. You couldn't bribe him. For whatever reason, he didn't want to sign. In 1957, let's talk about what happened in 1957. The Synagogue Council, probably some of you are aware of that, had members of Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. The Rosh Hashivas, Baron Kotler, Rav Rudima from Baltimore, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, decided that's it, enough's enough. And the 50s was a time when things were changing. And the conservative movement was really growing and developing and bringing in people. And orthodoxy was on, going down. So they decided at that time to disassociate themselves from the Synagogue Council. And they wanted again the Rav to sign on with him. Did he? He didn't. He didn't, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was at that point where the Rosh Hashiva decided that he's so independent, and he's so self-sufficient, and he's so strong in his day and his opinion, or some would say he's so stubborn, that he does his own thing, and you can't sway this person. In 1962, when Baron Kotler passed away, the Rav, who was the master eulogizer, there was no one in the world that can eulogize a person, nebech, nicht. We should never be, in that situation. But we are. That's the facts of life. Who was the individual that can eulogize a person better than anyone else? It was Rabbi Soloveitchik. In the world. People would wish and give anything that after 120 of their life, the Rav should eulogize him because of his chokhmah and his wisdom, and his articulation. He knew philosophy, he had a PhD in philosophy. He knew Torah, he knew Hasidus. What didn't he know? He knew Maral, he knew everything. He came to the shul, and there was standing room, and he wasn't invited to the dais. Now, who orchestrated that? Probably the so-called leaders. From their perspective, he had disobeyed. He had disobeyed the rabbinate, the Rosh Hashiva. He didn't say a word, and he had prepared the eulogy, and he went home. Now, I say that not to gossip against, Lakewood. That's not the point here. The point's like this, that the Rav knew very well that the stance that he took will alienate certain people, and he took it anyway. The Lubavitcher Rebbe did the same thing within the Hasidic world and the greater world. Many other Rebbes, Hasidic Rebbes, felt that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is deviating from the kind of European model of Hasidism. The Streimel, the long payas, the whole Hasidic garb, the outward garb. That bothered them. And then his kind of openness and of reaching out to people who are not yet religious, of all kinds, And not that he tolerated them. You know, I'm working on another book now between Satmar and Lubavitch, and researching that, which is, I'm sure, going to be uninteresting. I'll have to run away somewhere. They should know where I am before they stone me. But there's a difference between accepting with joy and love or tolerating a situation. The Rebbe didn't teach the world to tolerate a non-observant Jew. The Rebbe said, embrace the Yid as though he's your brother and your sister, he's your family. And if a brother or sister of yours goes away from the path of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism, for whatever reason, what are you going to say? I don't want to know about you anymore. No, he's your brother, he's your sister. He's yours. So the Rebbe also, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, stood up to the world regardless of the criticism. So what we find is that, like it says in yesterday's Parsha, Avram, it's the third day of his Milah. What does the Torah say? Kechoim hayoim. It's boiling outside. It's hot. What does Rashi say? Although it's hot and he was in great pain, nevertheless, there were people who didn't have what to eat. Hachnosas orchim, he brings them in. What's one of the spiritual ideas here? Kechoim hayoim means you're in love with God. It's passionate, it's burning, it's choim hayoim in the middle of the day. I can tell you that the Rebbe and Rabbi Soloveitchik, they were kechoim hayoim. They were two individuals that were in love with Hashem. All they had in their life was Torah. The Torah filtered itself down to incorporate and include other things that were important to bring Torah to the world. In the Rav's case, the Yeshiva University reads. In the Rebbe's case, his students and Hasidim. So they were kechoim hayoim. But although they were personally kechoim hayoim, when they saw that there are Jews that don't yet know about Torah, they go and invite them in to learn Torah, to come closer. What the Rav did with the yeshiva, and there were politics there too, in the early 40s, it didn't go so simple. When Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik passed away in 1941, the Rav's father, you think they wanted to give him the job to become Rosh Hashiva? So let me tell you a secret, they did not. And just recently, they released a document from Rabbi Lookstein. A fascinating document. He was part of the board of the meeting that they had meetings about, and it included also whether Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rav, should become the Rosh Hashiva. And they write there, and I've written it in the book, that one of the people who really got one of the board members in particular, who happened to be a supporter of Lubavitch too, to vote in favor of the Rav, was the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. Because this person was close to the Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. And Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak wrote a letter, and Rabbi Lookstein writes this in the notes, that we received a letter from the Lubavitch Rebbe, and he feels that the Rosh Hashiva to replace Rabbi Moshe should be his son, the Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik. Notwithstanding the opposition that he had, he continued. And by the way, that opposition came after terrible opposition in Boston. When he came in 1932 to Boston, look, he becomes a Rav in Boston, a rabbi. He wants to build a community. So in 1937 he starts the Maimonides Hebrew Day School, right? And then he deals with kashrus issues. And all of a sudden, an individual accuses him of tax evasion. He went to court. His life was on the line. He was vindicated. It's documented. But imagine, he comes from Europe. He wants to help a community. But what couldn't they take? His steadfastness, his starkheit, his awesomeness, his not bending and giving in to the schlachtoys, the slaughterhouses of mafia operations which were going on in Boston and New York, etc., and New Jersey. And he stood up. Well, when you stand up to the convention, to what's going on, they're going to try chopping you down. So he really, really suffered from the involvement with kashrus, and he decided in the early 40s that enough. He's tried to make a difference in the kashrus field in Boston, but he sees who he's dealing with, so he decides he's going to dedicate himself to chinuch, to education. And as you all know, those that surely who are Talmidim students of the Rav, he would call himself, Ich bin a Malamed. Ich bin not a Malamed. I am barely a teacher of Yiddish kinder, of Jewish children, Jewish students. A Malamed. What a Malamed. Talking about the Malamed, the book I wrote, Rav and Rebbe, has two goals and two ideas that are scattered throughout the book. One is to show the achdus, the unity that these people had for Jewish people and what they wanted of the Jewish world. Achdus, unity, which we need badly. We need it so much. Rabbi Kefet, who probably some of you know, who wrote the preface for the book, he writes that he finds that there's not enough of this being said in the Jewish world. You know, everyone is, my party is better than yours, my Hasidus is better than yours, my Hagudah is better than yours, on and on and on. My shul is better than yours. That's why when Reb Mordechai, and I thank him for organizing the event, I asked him, we're having it here. Are people going to come from other congregations? Because usually, you hear this politics. This one gate is done. This one doesn't go here. And this one has this. He says everyone is happy with our shul. So Baruch Hashem, and that's a big accomplishment. A big accomplishment for this shul. The second purpose is to talk about the Malamed of the Rav and what it meant to the Rav and what it means to us. And this is very important. The Rav always repeated a story with his Malamed in Chaslavich called Baruch Yankel. I used to call him Baruch Yankiv. The Russians, they say Yankiv instead of Yaakov. Yankiv, right? The Ayin, Yankiv. Baruch Yankiv Riesberg. And he said, my Malamed, he was my Malamed when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. And he taught us, the boys in the Cheder, Tanya, Chasidus. And he tells over the story how he came home and his mother, heard about it, and then he had the father test him, and he didn't know as well the Gemara, and they said he found out that's because he's learning too much Chasidus with it. That's the way the story goes. But the Rav simultaneously said that this Melamed of his, Baruch Yankiv Riesberg, he credits with the warmth and heart that he has for Judaism and Torah. And I want to spend a few minutes on this. There is learning over here. The cup, seichel, intellect. A gentleman here had a book on philosophy. There's philosophy, Hakira. It's very important. But Jewish learning, philosophy, or Gemara, even Hasidus and Kabbalah, there's the cup experience. The Rav said like this: the cup, my head, my knowledge comes from my father. My heart comes from my mother. The mother, the heart. Yiddishkeit, Judaism today is missing heart. There's a lot of intellect, but not enough of heart. Baruch Hashem, I observe and I see and I travel, and there's more, but still, we need to find ways to make the Jewish experience a heart experience. And I want to give you an example. Chabad just had a Shabbaton and chronicles last weekend with 1,200 college students. I'm not exaggerating. from all over the world. I remember in the 70s, we had once or twice a year what was called a Pegisha. Pegisha means a meeting, but in Chabad, in Lubavitch, what it meant was like this, that on one or two weekends during the year, college students and bright ones included would come to Crown Heights. And in those days, in the 70s, it was still, a remnant of the 60s. It was different than today's college students who want a Porsche and a nice girl. It was a whole different type of a college student. It was Seichel, Cup, God. Is there a God or is there not a God? What's the difference between a Jew and a Gentile? Is it important? And all of these questions. And I attended those Pekishas as a student. And they had a speaker like Rabbi Posner. Someone said he's from Memphis. Rabbi Zalman Posner Oliver Sholem was a rabbi, OU rabbi in Memphis, and he was a bright man and a Chabad chassid, and he was very articulate. And he spoke. Dr. Block, who was a philosopher in University of in Canada somewhere, and they had such people. Now, I attended those lectures, and they were fascinating. For me as a budding, student in the yeshiva and learning Gemara and learning Chassidus and going to Fabrengens, this really spoke to me. Wow. And I could be around these Greise Ket, these big heads, Sunday morning, some of these boys went to yeshiva. They put them on a bus and they sent them actually to Morris down here, to the rabbinical college, the yeshiva. What do you think made them get on that bus 7, 8 in the morning, Sunday morning? Was it the intellectual classes and lectures they heard throughout Shabbos, or was it what we call the midnight Farbrengen? 12 o'clock at night, Saturday night, Mutz Shabbos, Dr. Block and Rabbi Avrem Lipsker, I remember this, they would come in and they said L'chaim, and the boys were there, and they started a Farbrengen with nigunim, songs, and words of inspiration, and it went all night. And at the end of the night, 6, 7 in the morning, they had a few karbonos. They had a few sacrifices. They had a few boys that said they got so inspired by the Farbrengen that they jumped on that bus and they went to yeshiva. And I remember that. And what that taught me at the time, and I see it now with these 1,200 students who came. Do you think these 1,200 students are hearing deep lectures in philosophy, in Gemara, in Chassidus, in over all kinds of ideas? No. What they're getting is good chicken soup Friday night in the Chabad house. They're getting good chicken soup, and they're getting a smile and a hug, and that's what keeps them. Now, understandably, it keeps them, and then there's the next step, to teach them about God and Torah and life and good values, of course. The heart, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, the Rav says, comes from my mother. The heart comes from Rabbi Baruch Yankiv Riesberg, who taught me as a 10, 11-year-old a little Hasidus. And then he talks about what he witnessed when he moved to Warsaw in 1920, 21, or earlier, 1919, whenever it was. He says he tells the following story. I must repeat it because it's so endearing. He was in a shtibel, and they have shalashudas, and we sing zmiris, right? In addition, mi is Marla David, and then they sing ay, 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 this way, ay, 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 that way, and it's inspirational. It's time to gain a haim. Shabbos is over, Havdalah. And they're all sitting and enjoying themselves. Or negate the etiquettes, and they're not running anywhere, they're not going anywhere. So he turns around to a yidel over there and he says, and he was already 17, 18, 19 years old, he says, when will we pray the evening service after and make Havdalah? And the yidel says, was is mit dir? Looks at him and says, was is mit dir? He said it probably in Polish. Was is mit dir? Not was. Was is mit dir? What's with you? Sie dir nicht geht, du? It's not good the way it is right now. Wie läufst du? Where are you running? And Rabbi Soloveitchik records that. because it never left him. That it made such an impression. Where am I running to? Where am I running to? A pizza store? A movie? Where are you running to? Meloift. And this is a problem that we have. These gadgets, I mean, thank God for these gadgets, but at the same time, they have created this environment where we're not talking with each other. We're running around, phone, cell, text, this gadget. The Rav and the Rebbe were two individuals who taught that when you're involved with something, be fully involved. You know the famous expression, wenn ich ess, is outstoit. When I eat, the world is dead. When I'm immersed in my eating, my Bubba, who was a survivor from Poland, when I would eat, she didn't want my grandfather to speak to me. And if he started to speak to me, she would give it to him. Los him up. Erst jetzt. Leave him alone, he's eating now. Fully immersed in what you're doing. The Rav, in his healthy years, 40s, 50s, 60s, although in 60s, we'll talk about it soon, he had 3 losses: his mother, his brother, and his wife in 1967. And that was very debilitating, and Baruch Hashem, through his involvement in Torah, was able to get up and go further, although those that were close to him say that he wasn't the same individual before the losses to after the losses. But some say he was very stern. I mean, there's a video, I don't know if you've seen the documentary of his life, which I incorporated a lot of it in here because it's, I think, phenomenal. I think it's great. And the testimony that people share is wonderful. So they talk about how he was like a lion in a cage, a roaring lion coming out of a cage in the shear room with the boys. And, if some of you were those students, tell me afterwards. I'd like to hear from you. That's what I've done in the book. I tried getting to sources, not just what someone else wrote. And that's a hard job. You have to do FBI detective work, call up people and then interview them and ask the right question and fetch this way, fetch that way, and then you get to something that is different, is unique. So the Rav, why was he so awesome and like a lion? Because he was teaching the boys that to know the Torah, to know the Gemara, you can't just know it coming in unprepared and not focusing, and he demanded of them tremendous concentration. This is part of the brisk approach, and he was a brisker after all. The brisk movement, the brisk dynasty, better said, going back to Rabbi Chaim of Lozhin and then the first Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, etc. Their general approach is very stern, no monkey business. It seems to me, again, as an outsider, and Chaim Poltak once told me, Chaim Poltak had an opportunity to meet with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rabbi Shem Tov in Philadelphia was going to arrange a private audience between Poltak and the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Poltak's wife's actually from Crown Heights, and he was, I think, from the Bronx or the East Side, I forget now, and he would come when he was, meeting his wife before they married, and he had an opportunity to meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I asked, before the Rebbe passed away, 60 Minutes, Ted Koppel, who I met on a plane once, and I spoke to him about it as well. So Ted Koppel interviewed him, and he said, Mr. Poltak, why didn't you take the opportunity to meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe, this great rabbi? So he said, I was afraid my objectivity would be swallowed, and that's a verbatim quote. I was afraid my objectivity will be swallowed. When I interviewed Poltak in Marion Station, Pennsylvania, I went down to his house for another book of mine. So I asked him, Mr. Potek, could you please explain and elaborate, what did you mean? So he gave me the following example, and it stayed with me all this time. If you want to see if a house is painted nicely and decorated and has a nice lawn, do you see it from the inside, looking out, or do you stand on the outside, looking at the house? You stand on the outside. So Potek positioned, in order for him to objectively look at Hasidus and Hasidim and Lubavitch and the Rebbe, he had to remain for the outside. And he was afraid that the Rebbe's charisma would overshadow his charisma, and if he went inside to the Rebbe, he would lose that objectivity. That's what he said. I'm not a Talmud of the Rav. In hindsight, I could have, learned from him, but Achrei Mois Kedoshim, right? You wake up late. When I was a student in Lubavitch Yeshiva, fully engrossed in Hasidus, and that's all I knew. But now I'm a little older, and I take a step back, and I'm looking from the outside, and this was such a person that we should have gone to his shiurim. Okay, we weren't students in Yeshiva University, but he gave a shir every Tuesday night in Mariah Shul. He gave the Yartzeit shir, he gave the Tshuva shir. We should have gone. And then, so I could say that in a sense I'm an outsider to him. I'm an insider to Lubavitch. I'm a chassid of the Rebbe. I spent 25 years or so with the Rebbe, attending his Farbrengens, learning his talks, now writing about it, on and on. But with the Rav, I'm an outsider. So maybe I do have a little objectivity versus an ardent student here in the crowd. That's a real Talmud of the Ravs. And I tell you as an outsider that he was a fascinating person. I wrote, as Mordechai said, I wrote a book 2 years ago called The Real Shlomo, about Shlomo Carlebach. He was another fascinating person. Studying people and being able to write about it, I don't know, I get a thrill, I get a high. It's detective work, it's investigation, it's thinking, it's trying to find what does this one feel and what does this one feel. It's not one is better than the other. Who was Shlomo? A singer, a composer, a chassid, a hippie? What was he? Where did he come from? Or who were his parents? What did the relationship between him and his mother have to do on his development as Shlomo Carlebach? With the Rav and the Rebbe, it's the same way. Who were their parents? Who were their wives? Tanya, his wife, what type of person was she? What type of person was Rabbi Chaim Bushkin, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife? Were they public? Were they private? How did they impact the calling that the Rav had and the Rebbe had? And all of these aspects are very important when you try to study a person. And, like Rabbi Rakefet says, ask 10 people about the Rav, and every person will give you a different answer who he was. And the same I heard about Rabbi Carlebach. And the truth is, even the Lubavitcher Rebbe, if you take 10 Hasidim of his and ask them about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, they'll give you 10 different ideas too. Now, maybe with the Rebbe, since he was a Rebbe Chassid and he was with Lubavitch, and and he stayed with this group, and he didn't kind of interact much outwardly with going to this convention and that convention, but still there were differences. And what you find, and with all these people, and especially people like the Rebbe and the Rav, you find that emes, and that's what I began with, truth, is the common denominator that dominated their lives. We, who are students, children, grandchildren of students of these two giants, this is their legacy. The legacy of these people is the embodiment of their Torah and their teachings and directives today. Okay? So, emes comes also along with the idea of the Warmkeit, the warmth that the Rav wanted. Rabbi Lichtenstein, Rabbi Aaron, says also another interesting thing that was very surprising and interesting to hear from him. He's, after all, the Rav's son-in-law, right? And he was a giant in his own right. 1968 or 69, the Rav had it in the summer. Normally, when his wife was alive, he would go down to Cape Cod. But after she passed away, he stayed, and students went down. 1 or 2 of those years in the summer, when it came Elul, before Rosh Hashanah, the month before Rosh Hashanah, he said that he started to teach towards the end of his Gemara Shir, his Talmud Shir, some Hasidus from the Alter Rebbe, from the Balatanya and Lakuti Torah on Elul. And they're very, about Rosh Hashanah, what's coming up and all that. So Rabbi Aaron says that he turned to him. The Rav said to him, "Ich gemeinse wird helfen." I thought it would help. It had gar nicht geholfen. I'm thinking about this. Here he is. He has such devoted students. They love to learn from him. They're running from New York. They're schlepping in the heat, and they're running down to Boston, to head and to here. He's teaching them concepts they weren't familiar with, but knowing him, he explained it well, right? And he concludes, they're not getting it. They're not getting it. And he was disappointed. So I thought about it. Like, why didn't they get it? And what I'm going to say now is what I think is with a story. I'm going to answer the question with a story, and the purpose is not to walk away saying I have to be a chassid. The purpose is to look at the element of Hasidus, that it's a tremendous teaching that brings about warmth. The story is told of a student of the Vilna Gaon. His name was Reb Henoch Shik, known as Reb Henoch Shklov, or Reb Henoch Shklover. Reb Henoch of Shklov. Shklov was a Litvak area. Mostly Litvaks lived in Shklov. Reb Henoch somehow became a chassid, a student of the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. His father was up in arms. You're the prodigy student of the Gaon, of the Vilna Gaon, and you become a chassid? He couldn't swallow it. And he broke off relations with his son for a while. Wait. One day, and I heard this from a rabbi in Yerushalayim, who heard it from a person who heard it. This is a musmach, this is not a baba maisa, this is a story of what's geshen. One day he meets him, he's in the park, and he's getting some fresh air, and the father notices the son, Henoch. He notices him. Like a few years later, and he has this urge to talk to his son. But he observes him. He observes him from the distance, like I told you before, from the outside. And he sees that at his ordentlich, you know what ordentlich means? He's truthful, he's special, he carries himself with dignity and yirah shamayim, and awe for God. That he's really not a cult member. He's really not a heretic, an apostate, an apikoidis, God forbid. He's a real Yid. He goes over to him, Shalom Aleichem, gives him an embrace and talks to him. And he says, Henoch, I see that you're so frum, so religious. Where did you get this? I thought that you're getting involved with the Hasidim. Finito, it's finished. Geendigt. Gamarnu. He says, I get it from my Rebbe, Reb Shneir Zalman of Ladi. This man is an inspiration. And that's where I get it. So the father says to him, Oy bazoi, if that's the case, will ich sehen dein Rebbe. I would like to meet your Rebbe. If he's such a person, I must meet him. So Henoch says, Tate, father, once a year, the Balatanya would come to the little Lubavitcher Shtibele, the little Lubavitcher synagogue, Shilachel, in Shklov, because he had some Hasidim. They were outnumbered, but there were some Lubavs there. When the Rebbe comes here, you'll be able to see him because he conducts a whole Shabbos. We sing the Gunim, he teaches Hasidus. And Motzei Shabbos, you'll be able to actually visit with him, have what's called in Chabad, in Lubavitch, a Yechidus, a private one-on-one encounter, Yechidus, Yochid. The Rebbe and you are in private session. It's what we call a soul-to-soul experience, where you're able to talk what's on your soul, and the Rebbe responds with his soul. So it's not just an intellectual answer and question and answer. So he says, Motzei Shabbos, you could do that. Vayhi hayoim, the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya comes to Shklov, and the Reb Henoch Shklov is there Friday night and Shabbos, and he sees the way the Chassidim are learning, and the way they're swaying, and the way they're davening and synced, and he's and the whole frum, and he sees the way they wash Negelwasser, the bediuk, and all the hidurim, the details are exactly to the point, and they're so careful about their mitzvahs. And yet, he says, what's going on here? I was told that Hasidim is a cult, and they're wild, and they're dancing, and they're drinking, and some shugoyim. Like, what's going on here? And they don't care. He says, Finitazoi. What happens is, Motzei Shabbos, he goes in, and he says to the Alter Rebbe, listen to these words. He says, Rabbeinu, Kableini tachas kenofecho. Rabbi, accept me under your wings. I want to become a chassid of yours. The Balatanya thinks for a moment, and he says to him, No. I'm now paraphrasing. You are not to be a chassid. And he says, why not? He quotes him a verse that I don't know if it's in Minig Ashkenaz, but it's not. The Shabbos after Shavuos, some say what's called Yotzes. And one of them, and it follows the Aleph base. So the Ois Tes is like this. It speaks about the beauty of Torah. Tit, Mimenu yoytze chasidim, olam haba. There's a kind of cement, tit, that from this tit, chasidim, pious people, come from this cement, etc., and that's an olam haba, a world to come experience. Turns the Alter Rebbe to Reb Henoch, and he says, Reb Henoch's father, he says to him, you are not made from this tit. You're not made from this cement. So he says, Rebbe, what is this cement that you're talking about? This glue that you're talking about? He says, the tit that we're talking about is the shtickle herring and the kichel. A kichel is made, tit also, an uga, a little flour and water. Tit, cement, a little flour and water. Hasidim, there's a certain tit, a little herring, and a little schnapps, and a niggin, and when you have it from your youth, or you inculcate it in your older years, and it becomes part of you, then you're a chassid. Of course you can learn chassidus. Of course you can learn chassidus. You can know a lot of chassidus, and a lot of Kabbalah, and a lot of Gemara. But if it's not part of who you are, it's not in your, saying Yiddish in deine Beine, it's not in your bones, it doesn't permeate your essence, the schmaltz. I know it's bad for your diet, but then it's up here. It's all up here, it's not here. The Rav, when he said that his mother, the heart he got from his mother, that he said that Baruch Yankel Riesberg gave it to him, that's what he got when he was 10, 11, 12 years old. And it stayed with him all his life. When he comes in 68 and 69, tries to teach why you boys reach Bacharim as much as they can understand what they're saying. And they understood, but that's not their culture. The Maila, the advantage of Hasidism, as the Rav saw it, I'm not talking about the way the Lubavitcher Rebbe saw it is surely like this, but the way the Rav saw it was a practice that if you take it in very deeply in an emotional way, then it enriches your life in that emotional way. So I propose in the book, and I share with you tonight, that Hasidism can be experienced in a very deep way emotionally if you allow yourself, and the age makes no difference, whether you're 80, 90, 70, 50, 40, 30, makes no difference. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe said age is not after passport. Only your passport is your age. You can be 85 years old and you're a fresh chicken, a young spring chicken. So I think that the Rav left us more than just a Talmudic legacy. And, we're going to look back, we're going to look at the Rav's teachings, whether, there's a controversy today in the RCA with women rabbis and Gaboyim and Gaboyis, I don't know anymore, and all these questions. That I'll leave for the rabbis. But the Rav was much more than that. Of course, if you look into Piskei Dinim, I'll give you an example. I spoke to Rabbi Hershel Schachter, who was the Rosh Hashiva in the Yeshiva, right? I spoke to Rabbi Hershel Schachter about the co-education of Maimonides school. Was the Rav for it or not? Rabbi Hershel said, due to the situation at the time, in the 30s and 40s, 50s, he went along with it. How does he know to say that? Because in the 70s or 80s, in the early 80s when he was still well, I think a school in Toronto needed a principal, and Reb Hershel had a great candidate. One of his conditions was that separate the boys and the girls in the school. So he went to the Rav, and the Rav said, absolutely. So he turned around and says, Rabbi Soloveitchik, your own school doesn't have a separation. He says, my school had a reason why it was done that way, and because it was done that way for so many years, it's difficult to change. But the real way it should be is there should be separation of the boys and the girls. So, and I can give you many examples and many different halachic issues that it's easy to say, oh, he said this, he said that, and the same with Lubavitcher Rebbe. I don't want to take the time now to give examples. Not everything people say is, we say in Yiddish, Teres Lokshem. Teres Lokshem means it's not holy, holy, holy. You have to look at the sources. So I conclude the Farbrengen that we have an opportunity today, Baruch Hashem, in our communities, in our shuls, and children and grandchildren. I think it's important for the next generation. This is most important. We are all, kind of over the hill, But the future, the kids, the children, the grandkids, the college students, the future. We can impart on them the great values that both the Rav and the Rebbe left for us. And someone asked me, is your book more about the Rebbe than the Rav. Well, it happens to be 90%, I believe, or 80% is about the Rav, and only 10-20% is about the Rebbe. Because the Rebbe, I'm a Lubavitcher, so what do I have to write about Lubavitch? The Rav was all new to me. It was a chiddush, it was a novelty. So it caught my attention. And practically, I wrote in addition to the different chapters, I have a chronology of the years showing the connection. And with this I conclude. One of the big arguments against this Rav and Rebbe topic and Rav and Rebbe is, you Lubavitchers, it's propaganda. You're trying to take the Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was a Litvak, who was a Brisker, and some say I'm a Snagit. It's the first time I've used the word tonight. And you're making him into a Lubavitcher, because he came one time in 1980 to Lubavitcher Rebbe for 30 years of the Rebbe's leadership, the 30th at the Fabringim. All of a sudden. So, Professor Larry Schiffman, who reviewed the book carefully, and he endorsed the book, and he wrote a beautiful letter, he told me, and he writes, read it for yourself, that what I did was, I broadened the perspective. Let's forget about this narrow, narrow, how many times did they meet? 5 times or 10 times? It's not the quantity, it's the quality. And friends and friendship and relationship is about quality, not about quantity. So the chronology of the book, what I did was I went from the 1940s through the 1980s, showing in various ways relationships between the Rav and Lubavitch and the Rav in various ways. And I think if you look at that and you think about it, you'll see that it's much broader than just, meeting face to face. Naturally, let me ask you a question. How many times do you think, Rav Moshe Feinstein was related to the Rav, right? Because the Rav's mother, Pesha, was a Feinstein, right? How many times do you think the Rav and Rabbi Soloveitchik spoke every year? Twice? 3 times? Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Pesach, or maybe another time. That's it. Maybe they met at a wedding. And that's Rav Moshe, who lived on the east side, was a relative, was older, and the Rav had tremendous respect for him. Respect, friendship is about quality. And the Rebbe was the same way with the Rav. The respect that he gave him, which is one of the people who prepared the Rebbe's talks and sichos, told me that he once sent in one of the talks to the Rebbe to edit, and he sent it out, and he said, What will Rabbi Soloveitchik say about this source that you quoted in the Rambam? It was the wrong source. He didn't say Rab Aaron, he didn't say Rab Moshe, Rabbi Soloveitchik. In 1970s, the Rebbe sent, 76 or 77, a certain sefer that was printed by Chabad to 3 people, Charles Chevelle, Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, and the Rav. I have it in the book. And if you look, it's pretty much a form letter. But if you look carefully, you'll see there's 1 or 2 words different by the Rav than the others. And what is those words? The words are like deep thinker. The Rebbe really assessed and knew that Rabbi Soloveitchik was a real deep thinker. And the thing that hit me most is in 1983. The 80 years of the Rav's birthday. He was born in 1903. So the Beis Yitzchak Journal of Yeshiva University wanted to have some Divrei Torah from the Rebbe in honor. They were publishing a sefer, a book. And the Rebbe wrote back. And they wrote that we know how special the Rav and the Rebbe's relationship is. Therefore, it'd be very appropriate to have some words in our journal about Divrei Torah honoring the Rav. And the Rebbe wrote under the words, more than you know. More than you guys think you know about our relationship is much more. And I don't know what that is. I mean, I think I understand it, but I knew the Lubavitcher Rebbe a little bit. And if he wrote more than you know, I think he meant it. There's something goes way beyond, that what color is your yarmulke? You have a full beard, a half a beard. Are you a chassid? Are you a litvak? Are you religious, not religious? The Rav was very involved with Rabbi Schubert, I think Schubert of Boston, conservative rabbi, and he was criticized for it. Alexander Schindler from Worcester was the president of Reform. He was at the Fabrengen in the 80s with Rabbi Herschel Fogelman, and Rabbi David Hollinger was, and others were very upset. How can you? And then he stood up and he said, "L'chaim, I have a picture in the book. How do you say l'chaim to the head of the Reform movement?" They're different people. They're different people. They looked at the Yid differently. That wasn't giving a stamp of approval on Reform or conservative Judaism. They were looking at the person, the neshama, or Professor Zalman Dimitrovsky of JTS told me, interviewed him once. He said he was at the seminary, and he was going conservative, and he was a frum Yid, and he says, "What am I doing here?" So this is what he told me. He said to me like this, because I heard that he had a yechidus with the Rebbe. So I said, "Professor, why he was a litvak?" And he said, "I'm a proud litvak." I said, "Well, you're a proud litvak. Well, what's case it's Lubavitcher Rebbe? You have many gedolim, many authorities." So he said like this: "To go to the Satmar, forget it. I won't get into the door. To go to Reb Moshe is going to tell him what the halach is. You don't belong there." He says, "I went to Lubavitcher Rebbe because he was a visionary. He saw the big picture." And what did the Rebbe tell him? When Professor Shaul Lieberman, who was from of the seminary, Saul Lieberman, when Saul Lieberman will leave the seminary, then you should go out. But until he's there, you should stay. And why? Because when you teach the students, you're teaching 50 neshamas, and you're bringing in Torah to those 50 neshamas, and you can make a difference. Again, does that mean to say the Lubavitcher Rebbe was condoning, conservative Judaism and taking out parts of tefillah? Of course not. Of course not. But there's a vision. There's a bigger vision. And this is where the Rebbe and the Rav, the way I see it, they saw the bigger picture, not the narrow picture. There's a bigger picture. How to implement that, that's every leader's, every rabbi's decision in a sense. But the yesod, the foundation is there's a bigger picture. May Hashem help each and every one of us as we go into the winter. And the sun is not here, so the sun represents Shemesh Mogen Hashem Elikim, it says. It's the Hashem is there, powerful, obvious. The winter, it's dark, gets dark early, it's cold, frigid, apathy. We should all have inspiration from the Rav and the Rebbe, and Takeh Bizoichet to the Geula Shlema, to see Mashiach and be in Yerushalayim. Amen. I'll take some questions, comments, please. And I'd love to hear from people who are Talmidim of the Rav, because that's really why I came. So I think you're a Talmud. Say something. I would like to hear from you. Say something. Say. Tell me something that you experienced. What's your name, first of all?
Mordechai Glick. His shiurim were amazing. When I first came in, it was really quite astounding, because a lot of his many of his talmidim was squeezed right next to his desk, and then there was a big space, and everybody else was pushed up against the windows in the back. And
why were they at the windows?
What's that? Because they didn't want to. They were afraid
they didn't want to be afraid of him.
They were afraid of the road.
Right. They didn't want to be seen.
And he was amazing. And I don't know if this is really true that he didn't know anybody's name, but he pretended he didn't at least. So people would look down. They'd look in the Gemara. They never look up. So he would say, he'd say, you see, right? And everybody was looked out, so he couldn't call on them to read the Gemara in case they might misread it or may misexplain it or whatever, so you get very, very upset and whatever.
Rabbi Rakefet tells over regarding that. He says he would ask the students like this: say the Gemara. So if you raised your hand and you said the Gemara and you didn't know what you're saying, I mean, you didn't understand it, he would say, you know, this is the way you understand the Gemara? In other words, he would always say, darfst alleen verstehen. Say it in your own words. How do you understand? Don't be a parakeet to repeat what you heard from me last week, or you heard from your father, or your Rosh Hashiva, or your rabbi. How do you understand the Gemara? So if you raised your hand and you knew the Gemara, he gave you a check. If he called on you and you didn't raise your hand, of course he rolled fail, kind of, an X. And if you raised your hand to say the Gemara, thinking you know the Gemara, but you didn't really understand it because you were just mimicking someone else, he would write, Shakrin, liar.
Oh. Yeah.
That's who he was. In the Shakrin, in the last response, that's who he was. That was his sharfkeit, his depth. In other words, it's better not to raise your hand and get a fail versus raising your hand and being a liar. Pretending you know and you really don't know. And not you don't know because you tried, because I could see what you're saying. I could see that you didn't really use your mind to try to say, how do I understand the Gemara? That's what he wanted. How do you understand it? Not just mimicking someone else. I mean, would you say that's right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes.
The Rav and Rebbe, you said, were each unique. They each had their own principles about how certain things have been done. You mentioned conservative reform, etc. Nowadays, if you did something like that, they put you in chayrim. If you don't conform to the way the Welt is, so to speak, they put you in chayrim. So what happened? Tell me the economy what happened then and what happened now.
What happened is we don't have people that stand up for what they believe.
So now everyone's kind of a parakeet.
That's right.
Okay. And
That's
before
right.
Everyone had
That's right.
a strong opinion. You
Yeah.
don't like it?
I write what the research that I've come to, and that's it. You don't like it? Too bad. Don't buy my book. Write an ad against me. My next book is Satmar Lubavitch. I'm going to write. I'm not looking for gossip. I'm not trying to badmouth. On the contrary, I'm trying to bring out beauty, but Emmeskite. And frankly, I'm glad you brought up this question. I'm not going to mention names because that's not right. But we have so much yellow journalism, so many books. Some of my daughters don't want to read, the standard books. It's like, you're the best. You're the best. You're the best. No, good writing means show the challenge, show the hardship. How did he overcome? How did he deal with an issue? Does that make the person any less? No. But in today's world, they consider it less. The funny thing is, one more thing, that this book is on its third printing. You know where most of them are sold? In Borough Park. Lakewood. They want to read it. They want my Shlomo book. A Rebbe's son, I met him last week at a simcha. He says, "Oh, thank you for writing that." He would never. His father would jump out the window before he could authorize a book like that, where I'm taking apart a person, in a way that opens up a Pandora's box. So the answer is, unfortunately, that's the world, and that's exactly why they, in a sense, ostracized a person like the Rav and Rebbe, because they were independent. They stood up. So whether that'll change, I don't know. What I tell you, I see, You know, Reb Kefet sees it too. You know, everyone's going, you know, narrow. And all I can do is just present the ideas. Yes.
Rabbi Adler once spoke about the Rav.
Yeah, Rabbi Yosef Adler.
Right.
Yeah.
In the shul.
In here.
In the shul.
Yeah.
You mentioned one of the things that was unique about the Rav
Yeah.
is he was able to paskin in a certain way, looking at the individual, not necessarily like the halacha, but looking at you within the way things are.
Right.
And that was something very, I thought was very unique about the Rav, which today may not happen. Today it's like, this is a psak and done.
Yes.
Yes, I would just make one observation, and say that I'm nogay of a double because both of my sons went to Yeshiva Har Etzion.
Oh.
Steam. Zatzal was one of the co-rosh yeshiva at the time.
Yeah.
At least in the, generally speaking, YU world, I think that Rav Lichtenstein did have that same sort of stature. And if you ask, well, who today is like him, what I would suggest is that what he and Rav Amital built together at Yeshivat Har Etzion is substituting or resulting in an institution that as a whole has what he and Rabbi Amital were as two individuals. It may be expecting too much to expect there to be specific people, but you can try to make specific institutions, and it's much more likely to happen in a yeshiva where one or two, personally I think two, Rosh Yeshiva coexist and stamp it with their personalities. Why two? Because there's a story told of Rav Aaron Zatzal that when he was invited to come to Yeshiva Har Etzion and be a co-rosh yeshiva, his first impulse is to say, no, a yeshiva has to have a single person who stamps it with the force of his personality. But having seen from my sons and their friends and many of their acquaintances who were students of the yeshiva, the fact that you had two Rosh Yeshiva who were very different people.
Well, Yeshiva University has many Rosh Yeshiva. I mean, there's one head.
There can be too much of a good thing, where you don't have anybody who has an authoritative stamp. But the fact is that if you have two who get along very well, even though they're very different, and show great kavod for each other, that can then institutionalize what they were as individuals. It's a thought.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, we'll say
I'm
Yashar.
going to say there's a 9:30 mark for anybody who wants them.
Okay,
Are you selling the books now?
yeah, I'm going to sell the books if anyone would like, and Zeit gesund, and nice to be with all of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.